let's begin with reciting the blessing for Torah study at the top of the handout there. Together, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai our God, ruler of the universe, who has brought holiness into our lives through the mitzvot and commanded us to busy ourselves with words of Torah.
Can I ask you a question in the prologue here?
Yeah.
I always think of ruler of the universe, of some far out of space thing that has not very much relevance to me. Can I say, blessed art thou, Lord our God, King of the ages?
Uh-huh.
Can I say it that way?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll do it that way.
I mean, with anything, translation is difficult because you can never directly translate from one language to another. And often you have in a language, and Hebrew is just like any other language, where there's nuance in a word, right? And so when we say King of the universe, it's not simply a literal universe in the sense of, I mean, it means that, but it can also mean like the ages, for eternity, right? You know, it's this expanse. The whole idea is it's an expansiveness. By saying, you know, Lord of the world or whatever we're saying is the idea is that it's to kind of grasp some kind of that God is so vast and God is so great that it's not just
God is so sovereign too.
Exactly,
Okay.
right? And so obviously, you know, most people translate melech in the literal sense as king of the universe. I kind of like ruler of the universe just because it's not just limited also just to the masculine, if you will, but it implies, you know, something bigger. And also most, especially Americans and others, don't relate to this idea of a king very much. You know what I mean? Like, so, and if you're sitting here and you're like, I hate that you translated ruler, that's okay too, right? Because that's okay too. That's the challenge with any language is in the translation. This is why there's so many translations of the Bible. And there's really no such thing as the best translation. There are some translations that are better than others, but the whole idea of a translation is it's a translation. Every translation is an interpretation. And so the reason why there's so many translations of the Bible is because they each highlight different aspects and nuances of the biblical text, right? This is why it's so important to at least have a very basic grasp of enough Hebrew to be able to look up a concordance, right? You know, I think to at least know enough that you can look up words and stuff, because you'll see often how words have so many nuances. And that's true of all languages, right? Some words, I mean, are very specific, but many words have nuance depending on the way that you use it or the way that you put phrases together. In my Hebrew class, I always use the example of, you know, if I was going to stonewall somebody, but you try to translate that phrase, I mean, you're going to build a literal stone wall in front of somebody. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, it's hard to sometimes translate these kinds of idioms and stuff like that in word plays. And Hebrew, especially in the Psalms, has lots of word plays and things that sound the same but are intentionally different. Natasha, sorry, your hand was hiding.
So I think he watched a lot of Transformers because it was said. But outside of that, it means he's saying Alpha and the Omega. Also, that our stellar system is called the Milky Way. It's very limited. So universe is the cosmos. It's all encompassing. That is Adonai Echad.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. By universe, we don't just mean just our solar system. We mean and it's wild if you've we're members of the Connecticut Science Center because our son is like really big into science, and plus they have a lot of fun. It's really interactive. But we were watching one of those, you know, the IMAX movies and they have this thing from footage from some of the most recent satellites and stuff, and it's crazy just how our solar system, which is huge, is only like it barely even shows up in like the expanse of the universe. And to say that God is the God of the entire universe. Now, that can also be so unfathomable. It's hard for us to even exactly. And so that's why often we have language that makes God more immanent, like in the sense of, right, that both transcendent and immanent, like this sense of which God is beyond all things, but then also language in which God is intimate. And I think you see this, and by the way, it wasn't only Yeshua who ever referred to God as Father, right? We say, you know, Avinu Malkeinu, our Father and our King, right? But I think Yeshua was part of a group of rabbis at the time who really emphasized this personal aspect of God, not because it was absent in Judaism, but just in the sense of this extra emphasis on, you know, the kingdom now, right? And the relationship that we have with God and all those things. So you're gonna come join our class?
No.
Okay,
Okay.
well, just pick either being in or out. Which one do you wanna do? Okay, come on. So anyway, let's, I hope that's helpful.
That was helpful, thank you.
He's gonna help teach.
I know, so, okay, Sally. Okay, are you gonna teach the class now?
No.
So for today, I wanted to do something that's Passover related. And there's so many things I was debating on what to do, right? Because there's all kinds of fun passages. But I decided, since I always get questions about this, is a section that some people get confused about in the Haggadah. And so if you were at the Seder this year, or if you've, like, you know, some of us have been to countless Seders, we're gonna look at that. So this is a section from the section where we tell the story of Passover in the Haggadah, in which it begins, Baruch HaMakom Baruch Hu, Baruch Shenatan Torah Li'amo Yisrael Baruch Hu. So blessed is the omnipresent, or like, you know, the Hamakom literally means the place, but means like everywhere, right? Blessed is he, blessed is the one who gave the Torah to his people Israel. And then it goes into this telling. So who wants to read for us, you know, these first two paragraphs in English?
Okay.
You can read in Hebrew if you want to, but I'm just kidding. All right, no, go for it.
The Torah relates to four types of sons: one who is wise, one who is rebellious, one with a simple nature, and one who does not know how to ask. What does the wise son say? What are these testimonies, statutes, and judgments that the Lord our God commands them? Deuteronomy 6:20.
Right.
And accordingly, you will say to him, as per the laws of Pesach sacrifice, you may not eat an afikomen, a dessert or other foods, after we are finished eating the Pesach sacrifice.
Okay, so I'll give you my notes and I'll pull up. So what's going on here? So as I mentioned, there's a place in the Haggadah. Does everybody know what I'm talking about, or if you're not familiar with this at all, then obviously it can be a little confusing. So what we're talking about is
What's an afikomen?
the afikomen that's the piece of, you know, that when you break the matzah at the beginning of the Seder, and then you hide the largest piece, and the kids have to find it, and then it's that piece of the matzah that we use for, you know, either it's also called the dessert because it's the last food you eat during the Seder, but it's also, that was the piece of matzah which Yeshua, you know, and has the symbolism where Yeshua takes and says, this is, you know, of my body, take and eat. So that's what the afikomen is. And as I mentioned during the Seder in last Shabbat, I think it was, the afikomen is the only word that I'm familiar with in the Passover Haggadah that's in Greek, right?
Oh, that's right.
It's a Greek word, and it most likely is from the Greek word epikomen, which means he who comes, the one who comes. And so, and again, symbolic of why this piece of matzah, right? It gets buried, then it's resurrected, right? And it's this resurrected piece of matzah that we identify, you know, that Yeshua identifies with himself, both in its breaking and then it's in resurrection, right? It's actually, all the symbolism is pretty powerful if you're familiar with it. Sorry, I gave away my, so I just gotta pull up that. All right. So, everybody then knows what I'm talking about, right? So like what the afikomen is, so there are four, it mentions that the Torah relates that there are four types of sons. Now, some people, you've heard me talk about this before maybe, but you might be wondering, where does the Torah talk about these four sons? Right? So that's what we're going to look at. So we're going to first look at the whole section in the Haggadah. The Haggadah, right, is the book, the booklet we use during for telling the Passover story. So, all right, so let's continue. So who wants to read? So first we talk, so it mentions that there are these four sons, right? The wise one, the rebellious one, some translations say wicked son, one with a simple nature, and one who doesn't even know how to ask a question. And then Marianne just read for us about the wise son, right? The wise son asks, what are these testimonies, statutes, and judgments that the Lord our God commanded you, right? And then it answers. Then this is the answer you're supposed to tell this son who asks this question, right? And the answer is from the Mishnah, which is interesting. Okay, who wants to read the next son? What about the rebellious or the wicked son, the Rasha? Who wants to read that paragraph?
What does the rebellious son say? This worship to you and not to him. And since he excluded himself from the collective, he denied a principle of the Jewish faith. And accordingly, you will blunt his teeth and say to him, for the sake of this, did the Lord do this for me in my going out of Egypt? Exodus 13. For me and not for him. If he had been there, he would not have been redeemed.
All right, yeah. So that's good. So what's going on here? Why do the rabbis call this the Rasha, the wicked, or the bad son, the rebellious son? What's the problem that the rabbis, the way they interpret the question?
Well, he excludes himself. It's
Right, by saying, what does this mean to you? Like if we go back to the first son, and we'll talk about where these come from in a second, but the hint is that you can see the texts that they're pulling from in this, but the Chacham, the wise son, says, what are these testimonies, statutes, and judgment that the Lord our God commanded you? You have the you there, but he's including the our. And he wants to know just about, not just what is Passover, what are these testimonies, the statutes, the judgments, right? This is why he's the wise son. He wants to know the details of how we're supposed to observe Passover. Right? He wants to get into the meat of it all. And so that's why he's called the Chacham, right? Okay, and then the Rasha, the wicked son, he's called the Rasha because his question is just simply, what is this worship to you, right?
The rebellious.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, the rebellious son, he says, what is this worship to you? And the rabbis interpret the fact that he's not including himself. It's not like the earlier son who says our, right? That includes him in the our. So they view this as a rebellious act to you and not to him. And since he excluded himself from the collective, he denied a principle of the Jewish faith. And accordingly, blunt his teeth means you're basically, it's an idiom, I don't know, in the sense of just not you literally punch him in the face, but you silence him. You silence him, right? You silence him, and by saying to him, for the sake of this, did the Lord do this for me in my going out of Egypt? So the response is also from the Torah, from the Exodus 13. For me and not for him, if he had been there, he would not have been redeemed. So the rabbis view this is the wicked son because he chose not to be included. Remember, according to tradition, and it's hinted at in the Bible, they're Jews who didn't put the blood on the doorposts, who didn't participate. And so they weren't redeemed and their firstborn children died also, right?
But they were Egyptians who did.
But there are Egyptians who did, right? That they
Yeah.
feared God and they saw that the God of Israel was more powerful than the Egyptian deities, and they chose to leave with, they were part of what they called the mixed multitude, right?
Yeah.
And so this answer views this child kind of like those Jews who didn't respond to God, right? And so it's saying, therefore, you would not have been redeemed. Question.
But is the Rasha, this is, you would know more. You know, there's supposed to be two, a devil person and a good person whispering in your ear. Isn't one called Rasha? The devil one?
It's not Rasha, it's Yetzer Hara, which is again the evil inclination. So the idea is not that we have these literal like two people, but that inside of us, Paul talks about it as our sin nature. The rabbis talk about it in the sense of like we have a good inclination and an evil inclination. Not that it's necessarily Satan, not that there isn't later in theology of an adversary type figure, but that we all have these kind of tensions within us, and we can either choose to go with it or choose to resist it. At the same time, believe it or not, this is why it's sometimes complicated by calling it the evil inclination, is that the rabbis also recognize without the Yetzer Hara, we wouldn't, for example, we wouldn't procreate, or we wouldn't build businesses, or like if we didn't, because some of this is in, there's a little bit of our drive, which is not always entirely pure, but it's also without it, we wouldn't, right? So we need to have a balance between we need to usually emphasize the Yetzer Hatov, the good inclination, but recognizing that sometimes the Yetzer Hara can function in a way that can be redeemed as holy, right? Yeah. In the
let
same
me ask you
way,
this, if I
sorry,
can.
go ahead, yeah.
We're exhorted not to walk in the twisted imaginations of our heart. Is that what the Yetzer Hara is?
Yes, the rabbis would say that that's what it is. Now, this phrase Yetzer Hara, it's rabbinic, it's not biblical. I mean, what I mean, not biblical, I'm not saying it's against the Bible. What I'm saying is it's not a biblical idea. And so within some of these earlier texts, they're using different, there's no like set theology on this other than the fact that everyone recognizes, whether it's the conditions of our heart, a sin nature, however way it gets discussed, everybody recognizes that there's this tension within us, right? That we always don't strive to do what is right, even when we want to, right? That we have to resist temptation, we have to resist these things. Now, again, temptation is not a sin.
Right.
Sin is when you act on the temptation.
Right.
When I was growing up, there was this sense that if you even think it, right? And I understand that it's kind of coming from what Yeshua says, but there's still, we need to like not beat ourselves up. Like just because you're tempted or you have this, thought that comes into your mind, like doesn't mean you're this evil, debased person who has no chance of getting into the world to come. The idea is, I mean, that could be true if all you ever do is only pursue your evil inclinations. But part of it, what makes us redeemable, not only is obviously through Yeshua, but is the fact that we desire ultimately to do what's right.
Amen. Yes.
The righteous people are not those who never ever sin. Righteous people are those who, when usually given the opportunity to sin, they choose not to.
Yes, good.
Right? That's what all of us are. We're not perfect. That's why we need Yeshua, right?
Sure.
No one is perfect.
Can I say something?
Sure.
When Jesus said that when a man look at a woman and lust after her, he already committed adultery in his heart. He maybe didn't even get close to the woman, but he already had the lust.
Right. Right.
He already committed adultery in his heart. So how is that different?
So
the temptation and not.
So I think you're absolutely right. Yeshua makes things even more difficult.
Yeah.
He does, right? Like
Yeah,
it's let's just be honest. Like it's like, but at the same time, I think you have to also view it in a big picture. Like I agree, that's what Yeshua said.
Mhm.
I'm not arguing that. I'm not even saying, And I think it is like when you start dwelling, again, it's not the immediate thought, it's when you're dwelling on it. And even if you didn't actually do it, but if you're in your mind, fantasizing and everything,
The
that
inclination is then there,
Then it can
because you're
overcome you.
ruminating on
Right,
that
because I think that
Then you
Yeshua
have to
also
be
talks about
practiced.
resisting temptation. So there's the temptation, and then I think what Yeshua is referring to is that if you, it's not just simply look, but like if you're looking with, it's an ongoing thing in your mind, then it's as though you committed adultery. At the
It's like
same time,
helmets.
huh?
He likes the helmets.
Yeah. That's why don't stare at pizza during Passover. I'm just kidding. So, but if you were at the same time, I think even Yeshua would probably recognize if you were to put them side by side, it's better that you probably only committed in your mind, which is not good, but it's better than you do that than actually doing it.
Is it like not holding your thoughts captive?
Right, but we should be holding our thoughts
Yeah,
captive, right? So,
So,
for some reason I can't, the verse is not coming to mind, that, for the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, mighty through God to pulling down the strongholds, right? Like this whole, like taking every thought captive to the obedience of Messiah, right? So that the idea is, ideally, let's talk about an ideal world, which we
10, 4, and 5, if you want to read it.
Yes, so, well, I just quoted it.
Oh,
So,
okay.
So is that when, ideally, again, I realize not, we're not perfect. In an ideal situation, when the thought comes in your mind, you resist it, you deflect it in some way by either responding by scripture, by thinking of something else, by doing something to get your mind off of it, is what it means to like take every thought captive. Not only, but taking every thought captive is just basically like, finding a way to take back control of your
Yeah.
thoughts. Now that's hard to do, right?
Oh,
It's, yeah.
If it was always so easy to do, there would be no depression. There would be no sin, right? There would be, right?
Perfect.
Everything would be lovely.
Right, but like even righteous people fall into their, the thinking of their mind. Elijah reaches a point where he just wants to die. Like there's no hope. I'm the only one left. Please, it's just better for me to die. He's so, in such a fit of despair, right? And we see like in the Psalms, places where, the psalmist is in such distraught emotional situation, right? Also, there's distress, emotional distress, which is not sin, right? Because it's not just, it's not that being sad, for example, is a sin or whatever, but there's some things that when we cross the line into things like lust or, whatever it is, envy or whatever it is that, that we don't have control over, because thinking is still a type of behavior, right? And we need to have control over our behavior. At the same time, I don't think in the Torah, I could be wrong, anyone was ever, for example, stoned for only thinking something. Right? You had to sort of act on it. But this is also what's surprising about what Yeshua says. Yeshua says he takes it even further. It's not just enough that you shouldn't commit adultery. If you even think in your mind, like you've already committed adultery in your own mind. And I think what he means is not that you were tempted, but that when you dwell on it, you're fantasizing. You've basically already committed the act in your own mind. It wasn't just that you're tempted, like you've decided to carry the thoughts out even further in your mind rather than deflecting. Now, again, that's sometimes hard to do.
and when you're thinking about something like lust,
Mhm.
you create images in your mind, what you're
Right.
doing with this person.
Yeah,
And this can become real because our body
absolutely.
has emotions, and I think
Yeah,
Jesus was
yeah, it
just
becomes
thinking
real
of
to
something.
you in the same way, like all of us have had dreams that we swear actually happened, right? You know what I mean? Because they become so, they're so vivid in your
Yeah,
mind that you swear like, no, that thing really happened. Like, no, it was a dream. No, I tell you, it was.
Or
But
then
in
you
the
wake up and realize that
Right.
it really didn't happen, you go.
Well, that's also,
Don't leave a bad taste in your spirit.
right,
Like,
sometimes,
oh,
sometimes,
thank you, Lord.
sometimes that's a relief. At
Yeah.
other times too, not only can it become real in just sort of the emotional, everywhere connections within your body, like the physical responses you have, all these things. But also, the more you think about something, when you have the opportunity to do it, you're more likely to make a decision to do it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's
this is
true.
why, even as hard as it is, that we're supposed to try to have and exercise self-control. Because self-control and taking every thought captive is a way to hopefully not fall into the same sins. Again, the rabbis say that, righteousness is not that you sin and then repent. Righteousness is when you're then faced with the opportunity to sin again and you choose not
Decide
to
not
do it.
to.
Can I mention something that an Orthodox synagogue attendee said to me? Don't start something you can't finish.
Right.
If a relationship isn't within the grasp of being in the right, then don't even think about it at all.
Yeah.
If I'm not gonna pursue like a relationship with a woman for me or a man for a woman, just forget it. That's good advice, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Easier
Okay.
said than done.
Again, I realize that. Yes. I know. Well, listen, it's important to be honest. You can either approach things in these conversations by being holier than thou and pretending like you don't sin. And I think that that's a tendency among many followers of Yeshua, is to pretend like I'm holier than thou. And usually it's the squeaky wheel, right? The people who scream the loudest usually get caught in the behavior. Right? I think it's better to recognize that none of us are perfect. Listen, otherwise, what's the point? If we're perfect already, what do we need Yeshua for?
Right.
The community needs to be here because together we've had a life. Hopefully you've had a life-changing experience through Yeshua that made you a Yeshua follower. And we're together to build one another up. If I'm here to keep, let's say Richard and I are keeping each other accountable, or everybody else is, hopefully we're in a community where we're keeping each other accountable, then I'm less likely to fall into things.
Yeah.
It can still happen. Like, none of us should ever think that, be careful lest you fall, is what Yeshua says, right?
Yeah.
We need to both be careful, but at the same time recognize that the more that, this is why the rabbis say put a fence around the Torah, right? The more that in the sense that the more that we put safeguards up, then nothing's going to happen. So, for example, I do certain things a certain way in order so that I never get put in a situation where hopefully something bad ever happens. So, for example, like if a young woman or any woman wants to meet with me, I never meet with them by myself alone, right?
That's just a good point.
And it has nothing to do with trust of the other person. It has to do with trusting myself. I'm not putting the onus on, like the people who are like, it's the woman's fault for tempting me. Well, it's like,
You gotta protect yourself.
I know that I can be tempted, and so I'm not going to put myself right. So, and I'm just giving that as an example. So, whenever I meet with anyone, I always either do it in a public place,
Right.
or if I have to meet with somebody here, I leave the door open or whatever, like depending on the context, or if it's, too touchy of a situation, meet with my wife, or I'm going to have my wife in the room with me,
Yes.
you know what I mean? Because I don't want a situation to not only where I would be tempted, but also a reverse situation where somebody accuses me of something that is inappropriate.
Yeah,
I was
right?
gonna say that, 'cause
Yeah.
I have a pastor, he said, Rose, I will never give you a ride in my car, because if I do that, and God forbid I take you home, which I will never do that, but if I did, and one of our sisters and brothers see you with me in the car, they're gonna start talking and sinning because we gave an appearance of something that was not.
Right, even if it
We
wasn't.
have to avoid
right, even-
appearances of
And,
evil.
and that's what's tough, because
Right.
many times, like it can be a challenge, and we all have to, obviously, you have to draw the boundaries around,
Yeah.
your own individual situations and stuff. For example, Dorothy works here, so I can't not ever not be in the building alone with her or something like that, but also I made sure that, Anyway, we just have safeguards too, like even,
Yes,
you know,
that's just
it's,
a good
you have to
point.
just work around it, so. But yeah, anyway, all right, let's move on. Otherwise, we're gonna be here forever, just not even getting through the fourth sentence. So which one are we on now? The simple nature, okay, who wants to read that one? Okay, please do.
What does the simple nature son say? What is it? What is this? Exodus 13:14. And you must say to him, with the strength of his hand, did the Lord take us out from Egypt, from the house of slavery? Exodus 13.
So what they're calling the tam, by the way, the word tam in Hebrew can either mean simple, but it can also mean pure, or just, or what's another word I'm looking for? What? Innocent, but like virtuous. So for example,
Blameless.
Naive.
not naive. There can be naivete, but no, but for example, what, anybody know what it says on the crest at Yale?
No, sir.
No, I don't remember.
Says Orim v'Tamim, right? Light and Tamim, this like in here they're meaning it's simple, but the same word can also mean like virtuous or whatever. Lex veritas is what it is in Latin. But it's this idea of there's a V word I'm looking for it and I can't think of it besides virtuous, but anyway, maybe it's not a V word. Anyway, but this idea of like simple in the sense of like not simple but minded or whatever, but it doesn't mean pure, but just like some kind of virtuous sense. That's why it's in the crest at Yale. Most people don't even know there's Hebrew in the, so does Harvard has Hebrew in its seal, because both of them started as divinity schools, not as secular universities, right? Most of the colleges and universities started as seminaries, and Yale is one of them. So all right, so the idea here of the tam, of this kind of virtuous but simple-natured son, they're calling it simple-natured, is he's not excluding himself, but he doesn't have the first clue of like, what is this, right? And so rather than being harsh with this one, you say, and you must say to him, with the strength of his hand did the Lord take us out of Egypt, right? It's the simple question of like, what is this? What is this Passover thing about? And you're supposed to answer him, right? Each one of these, is the Haggadah unpacks it. It tells the son what the son says, what the son asks, and then what you're supposed to tell, the instructions you're supposed to, kind of give to the son. All right. Who wants to read the next one? The last one. Okay, go for it.
And regarding the one who doesn't know to ask, you must open the conversation for him, as it is stated. And you shall speak to your son on that day, saying, for the sake of this, did the Lord do this for me when I came out of Egypt? Exodus 13:8.
Great, thank you. So the response here that the rabbis have is that there are those kids who are either not old enough or just are not even in a situation where they know enough to ask the question. Then you provide guidance. You start with the basics, right? And you shall speak to your son that day, saying, for the sake of this, meaning that, all these things that God did for us, did the Lord do this for me when I came into Egypt? All right, so this is the section from the Haggadah. So where does this come from? Where do these four sons come from? Because most people are thinking in the sense that, where is there a place where it talks about four sons in the Torah, right? Instead, realize that there are four different places. If you turn the page, four different texts that underlie this passage. So there are four times. Remember that most of the time what the rabbis are doing, they're reading the text very, very closely. And they're picking up on all kinds of things that often we're not looking at because we read it fast and we're not really dwelling and spending a lot of time really pondering this. But the rabbis, and this is where what Midrash is they're picking up on the slightest little anything. And they're so inquisitive, they want to know what's the dealio, yo? What's going on here? What's going on? And so they recognize that there were four times that the Torah mentions when your son asks you something. So that then becomes the four sons. The four sons are the four places when your son asks you, or daughter, but they're, you know, in the sense, this is ancient times, they assume apparently that only boys have anything to ask. All right, so I'm not gonna necessarily go through each one, but you can see here from Exodus 12, and when your children say to you, what, in this case, it's in the plural, right? Children, when your children say to you, what does the service that the Seder means to you? You see from Exodus 13, and you shall tell your child on that day, and then Exodus again 13, and when your child asks you one day, what is this? And Deuteronomy 6, when your child asks you one day, what are the testimonies? So you can see here from 3 places in Exodus and 1 place in Deuteronomy where there is a question. In some places we have the question, and in other ones it assumes a question was asked and then it gives us the response, right? But the point is a response to these 4 different, you know, cases in which a child or children ask a question. Question.
From audience?
Oh, wait, hold on a sec. Natasha had her hand up first.
Oh, in the, I think it's a Tanakh, but I had an Orthodox Jewish acupuncturist, and when she opened their Bible, in the middle, it was Rashi interpretation of the things on the side. So is it that mind that you must always, it's not question, but have a conversation with God and ask him, explain this to me. You know?
Yeah. And, you know, whenever I teach, on, you know, the basics on the Bible, I always mention that there are 2 ways to read the Bible. One is devotionally, where we just kind of read through it and we're just letting the Spirit speak to us or minister to us as we read through the text. But then the other way which we should also be doing is studying, which is where you're meditating, right? It talks about meditating on the scripture day and night, right? Where we're really wrestling with the text and thinking about it and going over it. And that doesn't just mean like where you're pondering over a glossary and everything. Other times it just means we're really, like, I think it's helpful sometimes to have a verse or have even a word that we're just constantly wrestling. This morning I was so into this, like the phrase, Venatati Ruchi, the whole, you know, and I'll place my spirit within them and you shall be alive. Venatati Ruchi Beitchem, I think it is, V'chaitem, like then, and you shall be alive. Like that phrase has just really been sticking out to me. And that, you know, yes, the whole passage is important, but sometimes there's one thing that you're really dwelling on, right? And so it's important to constantly be, you know, not only are we supposed to constantly be like bathing our minds, which is part of this helpful of taking every thought captive, but, you know, when we're constantly bathing our minds in scripture, which is harder and harder to do with cell phones because we spend far more time flipping through screens, which only aid often in in the impure thoughts or whatever, you know, like not helpful in taking every thought captive. But if you're trying to deflect by, you know, the more time you're spending in scripture, the more time you're spending like, you know, these things, which is what our ancestors had. They had texts or they had ideas that they used to spend more time on. Not that they didn't fall into all kinds of problems either. But I feel like we have more distractions now.
Yeah, you got that right.
Television and phones and, right. So
Well, I
I'm
got
sorry,
a
you were gonna,
question,
yeah, you were
yes.
gonna ask a question and then.
For example, I'm looking at the words in Deuteronomy 6:20 through 21. And there's 3 sets, there's testimony, statutes, and judgment. The statute, I would say, is speed limit 65, that's obvious. But what's a testimony, what's a judgment?
One, I think it's 8 dukes, the other one is, here, let's look at it.
Did I get it right? A statute is like just a plain bread and butter, it can say face value what it is? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, a statute is more like the way that we're thinking about just like, you know, pure laws. I want to look up exactly what the Hebrew is so that we can. It's 6.
The American Constitution statute is a law that was approved by Congress. It's law. statute, else it's common law. So for it to be a statute, Congress has to pass it. The
Well,
law,
So I
law,
think,
law,
right, so I think for God, it would have to be something that,
The Sanhedrin.
is in the Torah itself, right?
Oh,
So cause adut is where they get this word, adut is the statutes, right?
yeah.
The hachukim, these are the, they're translating it ordinances, and the mishpatim. The rabbis mostly speak about chukim and mishpatim. The mishpatim are the ways the rabbis explain it as, these are the things that we believe everything came from God, right? But that, you don't necessarily need God to figure out it's probably not okay to do, right? Murder, the rabbis say, is mishpatim, right? Like these are things that a society could develop laws which are good for the society.
Hammurabi law.
Right, like the code of
So we're talking
Hammurabi.
about a testimony at this time?
No, I'm talking
Common
about,
sense.
I'm talking about,
I'm gonna let you talk, I'm gonna sit by.
no, it's okay. So a dute, I don't necessarily know the best way to answer that other than a statute, the way that they translate it. So I'm gonna speak on the chukim and mishpatim, because those are the ones that get used the most often, although, a dute, you know what? Natasha, I'm glad that you said that, because I think it does make sense, because we do often talk about the tablets as a dute. And that would make sense if something, if a statute is something that's passed by Congress, then it would make sense that the Torah laws, because they're from God himself, which is a court, right? The way that the rabbis would think about it, it's like a judge.
Yeah.
So they're instituted, the edut are not something that are from the rabbis. These are the
Right.
things that are from God. But there are three types of commandments that God gives us. So there's the edut, whatever we would consider a statute. There would be the mishpatim, which at least the way the rabbis describe this is, these are the things that are kind of common sense laws. Mishpatim, common sense laws. What is the translation here would be?
Common sense law. Man.
Well, here, they're using the word statutes for that. Although I would reverse these. I would say that the chukim the mishpatim are maybe the testimonies. I don't know. This is the problem with translations. We have to first argue about what the English means
Yeah. Well, but
before we can get into what the Hebrew means.
the testimony in the Christian world means how God showed up in your life. We overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the.
Well, that's the testimony of individuals, but the question would be is the way that it's used here in this translation for God. So it uses three, and this is the order, if you want to write this down. Edut is the first one, like EDUT. The second one would be chukim. Oh, actually, so let me write. Yeah. So I'll do the transliteration for you. Edut would be the first one.
Chukim, it's commandments, right?
Yeah, chukim.
Even if you don't understand, it's just instructions from God. Which you
The
do.
Exodus, correct?
Yeah.
Maybe you don't
Okay.
understand. Instead of mishpatim, it's like a law of the
All right,
country.
so hold on just a second. Let me break these down for you. So it says, when your son asks you, saying, what are these, the edut, chukim, and the mishpatim, that God commanded, that the Lord our God commanded you, right, is what it is. So edut are these things that I would translate that as the statutes. I think that would make the most sense. However, and that might not be the order that this translation uses, they use testimonies. Again, I didn't do this translation. I think all three of these, you can see what they're saying in some sense. I would say based on their translation, that judgments would be the mishpatim. And chukim would be,
Mysterious
well,
instructions.
they have testimony. I don't know what they mean by testimonies, because there is no legal language.
This is a testimony. We were
We're
slaves
slaves.
to Pharaoh. This is a testimony, and Adonai Echad
Yeah, but of the commandments, what is a testimony as far as the commandments, right?
Well, God proved himself to them when he
Free
gave,
them from being a slave.
when he
That's a
gave
testimony.
them the tablet.
Part the Red Sea, that's a testimony.
It could be,
Not shown, dipping in store, that's a test.
Okay, let's,
Yeah, I like that, it's good.
that's good. I'm just thinking about it
Yeah,
in the- in legal language. You See,
This is
the thing is when.
All that I've done for you, I've testified of all I've done for you.
Yeah, but that's not a command.
But it's the testimonies that, what are the testimonies? I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt. I testify that I did it for you.
Okay,
More like evidence.
But that's a testimony, it's part of
Yeah,
evidence.
it's-
Evidence is part of evidence.
They do this,
So-
statements.
yeah, I guess so. I guess you could
And
view
the
it in that sense of like the things where God says, like, we'd have to look at this word a lot more, closely. So I think let's stick with testimonies then, that these are the things that God did for us.
Yeah.
The chukim, these are the laws that according to the rabbis don't make any sense. Not like the mishpatim. So the mishpatim,
Can I make a suggestion?
what?
For example, like putting on tefillin or having a mezuzah, it reminds us of mitzvot for some people. And another judgment would be Exodus 15:26, if you do this, I won't put any disease on you, Egypt. Why do we have to eat scales and fins and not eat some
Right,
bottom
right.
dwelling?
So there are
scavenger?
laws.
It's a judgment that this is good for you. I'm telling you, this is my judgment.
Right, so there are laws that are given to us that don't make any rational sense. Unless you understand that God is giving them for a specific reason, right? And a lot of times, it's not even that alone is wrong or forbidden, but some of the reasons why God tells us to do things that don't make sense is simply to keep Israel weird,
Yeah.
to keep us distinct,
Oh,
so
okay,
that we won't be like everybody else.
all right.
So for example, kashrut.
Payas,
Well, kashrut is our chukim, right? Why does it make sense that there are certain things that we can eat and certain things that we can't? Today, people want to argue for health reasons, and I'm not saying that there can't be health reasons for it, but back then it was to keep Israel different, to be a diet for the soul, right? You want to know what else is chukim? Why can't you mix wool and linen? Who cares? Right? From a rational sense, why can't I wear clothes that are a mixture of wool and linen, right?
Listen, the bubonic plague.
No, I'm not saying that there can't be health reasons, but for example, there are plenty of things that you can eat that are fine and healthy for you, but they're not according to the Torah, right? Or on the flip side, we eat things which are absolutely not healthy for you. Schmaltz,
yeah, I hear
fat,
that. Yeah.
like, you know what I mean? And we cook with schmaltz, we do everything with schmaltz in traditional Ashkenazi cooking. Like, it's so unhealthy, it's a heart attack and a thing,
Right.
Kishka, chicken liver, like, ugh, I hate it, but it's like, oh, I hate it. But like, that's not unhealthy, but it's like, but the point is like, it's, if you understand that, not that there can't be some health benefits from it. Not that there can't be some health benefits from it, but I think you have to understand the primary reason for doing this is it's a diet for the soul. It's to get the most optimum spiritual performance out of what you do. In the same way, an athlete will eat a certain way, right? Eat certain things and avoid certain things to get the most optimum physical performance out of it. In the same way, we're supposed to eat certain things and avoid certain things to get the most optimal spiritual performance out of it. Right?
You can
Thank you,
abuse
Boo.
But
that.
that could also be, oh, sorry, go ahead. I'm just gonna, I'm getting wrong here.
You can abuse
I'm
that.
just
You can have a
curious,
cholesterol
person.
problem
I know you're
if you
curious.
work out.
I hope it's helpful.
Right, everything should be in balance, right? So, yeah, comment?
I heard someone, he was preaching, and he says, oh, God forbid Israel to eat pork because in the desert doesn't have hospitals. And I asked him, so now I can disobey God because
Right,
I have a
Right.
hospital to go?
right.
And he went silent. So this is
Right.
crazy. Teach someone
So
something like this.
I mean, now we know that, for example, with pork, there are some health benefits to it. But technically, if you cook it well and everything, you can eat pork and still be healthy and fine, right? So the issue I think we have to realize is there's a spiritual reason that God is not wanting us to do it, right? It's to make Israel unique. And it is true that I don't think in ancient times people ate as much meat because they didn't have things like refrigerators and stuff. But like you just mentioned, if that's the only reason, then I can now do it because we have refrigerators or you know what? Yeah, Pepto-Bismol, right, exactly. We have Tums for heartburn. Or you know what? It's okay for me to eat pork now because it was only for health reasons. And so therefore, now that I know I need to cook all the maggots out of it, I'm just kidding. You know what I mean? Like, I just need to make sure that it's cooked really well. Right, I need to just make sure that it's cooked really well, but now that I know it, I can eat it because God just gave it to us for health reasons, and so now we know what the health reasons were, therefore I can eat it. No, right? The point is not, there's a bigger reason that God wants us to avoid these things. Natasha.
Yeah, Merle says, because I had a long list for God, my list for questions for God. And then Merle said, when she was teaching the children, that the answer is Jeremiah 29, and I agree. For I know the plans I have for you.
Says the Lord, right?
Yeah, so that crossed off a lot of my questions, because now I say, okay, he wants to prosper me. It's not monetary prosper.
Right.
Soul prosper.
It's soul prosperity, right?
Yes.
And I think we need to realize that we need to think much more holistically, right? And that there are bigger reasons for why God gives us certain instructions. I mean, some things are clear.
It's so
Right.
simple, I believe.
It,
Just to be my people.
right,
It's
Right.
what it is. Be holy because I am your
right,
God is holy.
right.
And
Right,
what's
right,
the
right.
Leviticus all instructions about the food, about the holidays and everything else? It's the code of holiness.
Yeah,
Right.
And if you my people, you call by my name, it means listen and obey my commandments,
yeah,
even if you don't understand.
right,
The whole point of to choose the Israelites to be his people, correct?
yeah,
It's
absolutely.
the same thing in the New Testament, and that's renewing the covenant with house of Judah and house of Israel.
Right,
And you not was Gentile, pagan, wherever it is, you worship your gods. Now you call the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob your God, right?
right,
So now you are his people also.
right.
You join the party, Ephesians chapter 2.
Yeah,
If you join the party, you come to the household of God. So to follow the rules of household,
right.
head of the household, correct?
Yes, sir.
If you call by my name, so do what I require. And it's a commandment of the New Covenant, New
Right.
Testament. You can be holy because I am holy,
Right.
that Peter quoted.
Right.
So it's so
Yeah.
simple.
Yeah, I think,
Even if you don't understand
yeah,
why God prohibited to eat pork. Today is the scientists shows you, they prove you. I saw the video. Correct. They studied the
yeah,
pig
yes,
meat,
right.
what is inside of the good for you, but
Yeah,
you can call it good as much as you want.
right,
There's nothing good there because God doesn't create it for food.
right,
Yeah.
right.
It's what it is.
Yeah,
What God created to match your, actually, when I was fasting, God teach me about this stuff. Because our body is created by God.
hmm,
And all our organs contain, it's like
Cells,
sound, yeah, it's like waves,
yeah.
Frequency.
frequencies.
well, all kinds of
Yes.
stuff. Our body is really complicated, right?
So the food supposed to be match the frequencies of the organs of our body.
Wow, that's.
It's how God created this
Yeah.
universe, how God created things. So if God say this is not food, it's not food.
Exactly.
And when New Testament talk about food, and apostles writing about food, they meant it's what God called the food.
Yeah,
Timothy.
yeah, no, I agree,
Timothy, right?
I agree.
What
All right.
God created and called as food is good for your body, even somebody prohibited to eat it.
I totally agree, and that's why I was saying that we need to think about this more as the diet for the soul. Okay, we've really digressed from where I wanted to go with this, but
But what you said made so much sense. I don't know that I've ever heard anybody put it that way, that it's to set them apart.
yeah.
Hello? Because
What it
people
even
have asked
says
those
many times is
questions.
the reason to do this is so that you will be different from the other nations around you.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
I agree though with what Yaakov was saying in the sense that, you know, that I like this idea of like God giving us things that intentionally, you know, match the frequencies, right? In the sense that you know, what our body needs is going to be matched by what God gives us, kind of an idea. But I also just want us to get away with kind of explaining away the commands. Like it was only given for health reasons, for example. Well, then therefore,
It's not applicable anymore.
it's not an applicable. Yeah, right. But rather, there's a bigger reason than. And again, I'm not negating that there aren't health benefits. What I'm saying is that it's bigger than that.
Yeah.
Because if that was the simple reason, then if I just cook my pork really well, then it doesn't matter anymore, right? I'm just giving you a for instance. Now, I'm not making that argument. I'm not. Okay, so let's move on. So you see where the underlying Torah passages for this come from. So let's get into some analysis. So who wants to read this next paragraph?
I will.
Okay.
From these 4 sets of verses, each commanding us to teach the next generation about our exodus from Egypt, we have to question why this had to be repeated. It is commonly understood in the study of Torah that nothing is repetitive, but instead anything repeated is done so for a reason.
All right, that's really important. One of the primary principles of biblical hermeneutics. The more something is mentioned, the more important it is, right? And for those of you who have taken the Hebrew classes, Hebrew is a doubling up language. When you want to emphasize in Hebrew, you use the word twice or slightly, you know, you do what's called doubling up in order to provide emphasis. So for example, when the passage that's usually translated, justice you shall pursue, in Hebrew, it's tzedek tirdo, right? It uses justice twice in order to emphasize only justice or an emphasis of justice you shall pursue, right? It's emphasizing tzedek tirdo, that even in a verse, this doubling up is an emphasis. And the same way goes with the number of occurrences. The more that something is mentioned, the more important it is. Okay? All right. So next passage, the next paragraph.
I'm back.
Almost
time.
Well, no cricket, here I go. According to Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, rather than seeing them as restaurants of the same, I'm sorry, I'm a little tired.
Restaurants would be interesting.
Restatement of the same idea. The sages detected in the different ways the verses are phrased 4 distinct personalities, thus 4 kinds of children.
So he's making one idea could be that these 4 children represent, you know, different kinds of personalities. All right, next paragraph.
Each child asks the question in a different way and must, therefore, be answered in a different way. Educators understand that, according to Proverbs 22:6, teach a child according to his way, his strength, his ability, his appropriate level, and he will never depart from it.
I like that interpretation of seeing that, because we've all heard that phrase before, teach a child in the way they should go.
Yeah.
But the idea of putting it in the singular, teach a child, means in the specific way that particular child needs to learn, right? I like that. I just think that's an interesting idea, and he will never depart from it.
All right.
All right, who wants to read the big one? Mary Ann?
But there's also another way to understand the 4 sons. According to Sachs, it may be the 4 sons are not different people, but successive stages in the development of a child. We begin by being unable to ask. We accept the world as given. The next stage is in intellectual growth is curiosity, the child with simple nature. We ask the questions with no ulterior motive. We simply want to learn. This is often followed by a period of testing and challenging the values we have received. The wicked child or the adolescent, the Hebrew word for
Teenagers.
adolescent. Na'ar also means shake off. The teenage years are ones where we develop our own identity by putting received values to the test. This can sometimes lead to a rebellion as a form of self-expression. The accumulation of
Same idea though.
You want me to continue?
No, go for it.
Okay. The accumulation of cognitive growth is wisdom, the point at which we have internalized the values of our heritage and are
Yeah, it should be
sufficiently.
and, sorry for the typo.
I made it, are sufficiently mature to see their objective merits. Although the Haggadah uses the word wise, rabbinic tradition preferred the phrase Talmud Hacham, a wise disciple. Wisdom in Judaism is not a state, but a process of constant learning. That is why it lies as much in the questions one asks as in the answers. Every answer is itself the prelude to a deeper question, and thus there is constant growth as we move to new levels of understanding.
I love that idea, is that he's saying that rather than even 4 sons, yes, you can look at it as 4 different individuals or personality types. We can also see these as developmental stages, right? Which I kind of like that idea. So what it does, it also reframes the wicked child as it's not really wicked. It's part of the cycle of life. Well, I love, and I didn't quite realize this, but the Hebrew na'ar, which is we usually see translated as like a child or and usually translated lad. Like it's the same word when it says Moses takes 2 lads with him up. It's na'ar. It's the same idea, but he said the word also means to shake off, which makes sense that as this, because Hebrew has different words, just like we do. So a yeled or yelda is like a child, like a boy or a girl, but a child. Na'ar can be older, like like a teenager. And so the fact that na'ar also means shake off would make sense. There's this sense of which, as frustrating as it is, part of adolescence is to kind of challenge the boundaries and stuff. Anyway, this isn't the only way to think about it, but I think what Rav Sachs does is present an interesting way of looking at this, the issue of the 4 sons within the Haggadah and
It's good.
Anyway, I just want you to see, like, when we celebrate Passover, there's often people are like, oh, do you have a question, Rose?
I hope this is pertinent to this discussion. I can help by not asking this. I hope this is good environment for this question. I know probably 5 minutes I need to leave. I know you were talking about tomorrow at 6 p.m. It's like Yeshua's resurrection.
Not at 6 p.m., but just
6
starting tonight
Tonight.
through tomorrow, sundown tomorrow
Tonight, 6 p.m.
is resurrection.
So Tuesday night, so 3 days, 3 nights, because I asked a couple evangelical leaders in my community and they kind of misled me a lot and I'm very, I was upset, but they're counting like the Good Friday and then to Sunday morning. And
So,
they're saying like
right.
in
So-
Israel, that's how they count 3 days and it doesn't give you 3 days,
So-
2 nights.
So it would be Sunday that Yeshua would have been resurrected, at
Okay.
least by the way, all the evidence that we have.
But he died. He didn't die on
Let me
Friday like they
explain
teach us in
It
the
would
Catholic
probably be
Church.
Thursday,
Yeah.
but that would be sundown would be technically Friday. Again, they're not thinking
Oh,
Monday,
right,
Tuesday,
right,
Wednesday,
right.
Thursday, Friday. There's, according to, remember in Jewish thinking,
Yep.
it always begins the night before. So day 1, day 2. So in Hebrew, you just simply call them Yom Rishon, which is day 1. Yom Sheni, Yom is what we would call Monday. It just means day 2, right? In Hebrew, they're not called by the names like we have. They're just simply called day 1, day 2, day 3, and then Yom Shabbat, like the Shabbat, right? So on which day depends. We'd have to go back and it's this complicated thing. But the question is, in order to get, there are 2 debates. Well, there's actually a few debates regarding Passover and Yeshua and the Last Supper and all this kind of stuff. But according to this, the discrepancy would be over whether it has to be a full 3 days and 3 nights, or whether it can just be 3 days, and, but then it would be like whether or not it's Thursday versus Friday, right? But either way, that it's on the first day of the week, which would be Sunday, that
Yep.
Yeshua is resurrected. And it would be on, if it's, we
Yom
obviously,
HaBikurim.
right, if it's Yom HaBikurim, then it has to be the day after Shabbat. It wouldn't be on
Rabbi,
Shabbat.
Yeshua did say something, I can't remember the verse, it would be exact like
Jonah.
Jonah.
3 days and 3 nights.
Right, so it would be a 72-hour cycle thing.
Well, that's, again, is that figurative or is it meant to be literal,
I
right?
think it's.
And now,
literal.
well, again, but
That's
this
the
is,
Bible clearly says.
no, but this is the debate.
Genesis.
No, but this is the debate. This is why there's a debate.
Yeah,
There are people who argue it's literal. Those are the people who view it figurative. If you view it literal, then it can't be Friday.
No.
It has to be Thursday. But we have another problem, even when when the Last Supper was held. In the
Wednesday.
synoptic, in
Wednesday.
the synoptic gospels, meaning Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it's a Seder on Passover night. According to John, it's the night before Passover starts. It's a Seder-like meal, but it's not on Passover. It's before Passover starts, in order that Yeshua
He
can
is the
be the
Passover
Passover lamb who is crucified when the lambs are being crucified, which means the Seder was not a Seder on the first night of Passover. Now, there are ways to possibly reconcile this by viewing maybe Yeshua was using not the Pharisaic or the Sadducean calendar, but the Essene calendar, but that would clarify this. But again, it's complicated. So there are many debates on this, and this is why, but generally it's accepted that Good Friday, although it could be Good Friday if Yeshua was in the tomb by nightfall the night before,
Actually,
right?
Friday is added to the text. If
Huh?
you look in the Greek text,
Uh-huh.
there's no Fridays exist.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that I don't know,
It's
I'm
the-
not a Greek scholar, but at least in Hebrew,
Preparation day,
it would,
Preparation.
but according to the John. And
right.
Preparation day.
But again, is the
before
preparation for the weekly Shabbat, or does it mean for the beginning of
For beginning of the
Passover?
Passover
Passover, yeah.
Shabbat, because in these days, when they celebrate, according to the Moses, we read this scripture today,
Right,
this morning,
yeah,
how you celebrate. There is a first day of the Pesach,
right,
it's the Shabbat,
right,
Shabbaton.
right.
So you don't do any work, and also seventh day of the unleavened bread.
Well, but
It's
the problem with what you're arguing.
Doesn't matter what,
No, no,
which
No, but what I'm
day of
saying,
the week.
what I'm saying is, if I understand you correctly, the problem with what you're saying is that they would have violated Passover. But, and so, not,
No, the Pesach,
so
Passover
according,
before, so they must be take off the cross.
right,
Before
before,
the Shabbat.
no,
Before the first day
before
of
the
the
beginning of, well, this is,
unleavened
again,
bread.
this is the issue. Before Passover
It's on
starts,
15th.
it would have to be on, it would have to be on the 13th of Nisan, before Passover starts in the evening. So anyway,
So 14th of the Nisan.
all right.
Start.
Get lost.
We're not
At
gonna
the
get
end
into
of
this
the
because,
14th.
no, we're not gonna solve this because nobody, for 2,000 years, we haven't solved it.
I'll say that.
No, for 2,000 years, no, we haven't got them to agree. What I'm saying
It
is that
doesn't matter.
there is a discrepancy and you have to wrestle with it. And I think that there is an answer, it's just not as clear as we would like it to be.
Right.
Because I don't believe that the earliest canonical writers would, if they really felt there was a discrepancy, in my mind, again, but I'm an academic, I would think they would have fixed it so that it was clear.
Mhm.
In their mind, there was no discrepancy. The problem is in our mind, there's a discrepancy now.
Right.
And so we just have to find the right answer of how to bring them together. But
Exodus 12.
no, what I'm saying is that it's not so simple. Because you still have John saying that Yeshua's supper was before the Passover lambs are killed, which means it's not Passover.
Right.
So, or you go with the other three gospels where Yeshua's Passover Seder is a Passover Seder on the first night of Passover, which means they're eating the Passover lamb. In Yeshua's Seder, what they were eating was not the
Not
Passover lamb.
Right.
So, but what I'm saying is that there's no way to get these to agree yet.
Hmm.
We don't have a way to explain how John is different than the other three gospels. So in my mind, I have to go with the first three because they're older. And so, anyway, we're not gonna solve this. So listen, no, I gotta go home and I know other people have to leave. No, what I'm saying is we're not gonna solve this. Trust me, for 2,000 years,
Translations of the gospels,
She's just saying.
you will be misled.
No,
If you look at it.
no, what I'm saying is that it's in the
No
Greek.
contradiction.
No, listen,
No contradiction.
listen,
John, Mark, and Luke.
Jakob, I'm not gonna argue with you. I'm telling you as a scholar who knows what I'm talking about, that there's a discrepancy in the Greek. I'm not talking about translations. I'm saying in the Greek, there's a
The Greek
discrepancy.
is the translation.
It is, but we don't have anything earlier
We
than
don't
that.
have original text.
We don't have the original text. And
That's what
so,
it is. What's the
well,
problem?
actually,
Thank
I
you. He
believe
agreed
that,
with him.
I
So the
believe,
translator is the
no,
problem.
It also depends on whether, for example, John is the original text. It also depends on whether or not you agree that there was an original Matthew Hebraic text. I doubt it, but this is a difference. Again, this is a debate among scholars. So, all right, we need to wrap up class. So, as far as the four sons, now when you see and you wonder where in the Torah does it talk about four sons, it's
There
there
it
four
comes.
different instances that talk about the sons in Passover. And the answer that we're supposed to give them is at least inspired mostly from the Torah, even if it includes things from the
Amen.
Mishnah. So anyway, this is good stuff. And I know that there's like debate, but this is part of the excitement of it, right? We're supposed to take this seriously and we can wrestle and we're supposed to wrestle. And I do agree, as Yaakov is saying, is that there is a way to rectify this, but I haven't yet heard a convincing argument, and I'm aware of all the, trust me, I've read it in Hebrew. I'm not a Greek scholar, but I'm familiar enough with like concordances and stuff to look at it, and I'm familiar with the debate itself. And this is just a challenge of whether or not Yeshua's Last Supper, either way, by the way, even, and this is what I would disagree with some scholars on, is that even if John is correct, and Yeshua's Seder type dinner is the night before. So they're not actually having a Seder on the Passover night. It still is a Seder-like meal done according to the order of Passover, because it mentions the multiple cups, right? Right? So the
Right.
different things is it had to be a Seder-like meal. The debate is just over whether or not at that meal they ate the Passover lamb, because this would have been, anyway, there's a lot, this is a huge conversation in and of itself.
They couldn't eat
And-
the Passover lamb because Yeshua is the Passover.
Yeah, because he was gonna die the
Well,
next
that's-
day.
Well, but this is the debate.
Yeah, that's why.
Well,
they're waiting.
but this is the debate, because all the years prior to that, they would have eaten the Passover lamb, right? So, right, because all the years previously, it's not like Yeshua ever said, I can't eat the Passover lamb because I'm the Passover lamb. Right, but the problem is then he wouldn't be the Messiah, because he would have violated the Torah. The Torah says you have to eat the Passover lamb, so
Right.
anyway, so, all right. Like I said, there's big discussion.
To keep our thoughts
Exactly.
captive on.
So anyway, all right.
Let us pray.
So, Avinu Malkeinu, I pray that you would bless our week ahead, that you would, that as we conclude Passover, that you would still do something great within us, that those who are waiting for a breakthrough, that need deliverance, God, that there is still time to experience that deliverance. And I pray that you would continue to work within us. And God, we thank you for your resurrection. What is clear, what is absolutely clear, and there is no debate, is Yeshua was buried and resurrection and resurrected. And so we thank you for that. We thank you for the fact that you worked atonement on our behalf. And we thank you for that. And by your resurrection power, that we would, receive some of that resurrection power to do your will in this earth. And so we thank you, God, in the name of Yeshua. Amen. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.